Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Building Bigger Lives podcast with Michael Regan and Katherine Peterson. And as we do each and every Wednesday, we're bringing you the entrepreneurial spirit, an opportunity to visit a topic that we think is valuable to you, whether you're in a sales leadership role, a business ownership role, or some version of management where your desire is to be more than just a passive manager. You really want to lead. You want to lead yourself. You want to lead your team. And we're going to bring some topics from time to time that we hope hit that bullseye. Today's topic, you no doubt saw when you clicked through the show title. We're going to take a look at what I'm going to now call a little bit of a modern business classic, Michael Hyatt's Free to Focus. So consider this one of our book club episodes. I'll tell you a little bit about my experience with this book and where I've used it. But before I get too far into that, I want to bring my friend Katherine into the frame. Katherine, how are you today?
Good. I'm excited about another book club episode. It's been a while. So this is a great one to cover. So yeah, let's dive into it. Tell me about your experience so far.
Well, I think back in 2019, this one hit the bookshelves, and I was really quick to order a copy of it because at that time, my friend and head coach Daniel Harkavy had been working closely with Michael Hyatt on the Living Forward book that had really framed out the value of life planning as a business tool. And we've talked about that on a previous podcast. And so I know our audience, if they follow along, they're familiar with Living Forward. And I think we've invited Greg Harkavy on at one point about a year ago, where he had a chance to unpack some of his brother's ideology on that. But he and Michael Hyatt partnered on that book. So Michael was on my radar as a guy I wanted to pay a little more attention to at that time. And he has since, by the way, published several books, and I'm sure there are plenty of them that our audience might be familiar with. But Free to Focus hit in 2019, and it grabbed my attention because what many of my clients ask me for is tactical tools for them to implement. And this book was just cover to cover full of them. And so I got excited about it when I read it because I felt like I could hand this to any client or download it as an audiobook with any client and ask them to action plan it and read it or listen to it and trust that they were going to come back with all kinds of opportunities. So I think you were maybe in the room at one of my roundtables in 2019 back in Lake Oswego,
Hmm.
where I brought this book and put it on the table for everyone because I just felt like this is one that I'm going to push. Usually I let
Hmm.
folks bring to me what they're interested in, but sometimes as a coach, I'm really passionate about one. So that's where Free to Focus came from for me. And yeah, you were definitely one of the earlier adopters of much of what we have here. Do you remember me handing that to you, Catherine, or what was your first impression when you first saw or read Free to Focus?
Yeah, so for me, I like the first is the title because there's two things. One is just creating the freedom to focus. And I think that when you think about it, it's like I'm sure that a lot of thought went into it, but it's a title that you go, wait, what does that actually mean? Am I free to focus? And once you start listening to the book, it kind of becomes more clear that you have to, like the first section talks a lot about stop and evaluate, and that's creating that freedom so that you then can focus. And that's I think the first thing is just that title is huge.
Yeah, it's a great call out because I think titles are often chosen by the publisher, and they're designed to do exactly what you said, get someone's attention. And if you think about walking into a Barnes and Noble back when these things were popular, your book had to stand out on a shelf with a
Hmm.
lot of other topics. Well, I guess today too on Audible, same thing. You've got to really be able to stand out. So certainly reviews help, but the title has to be intriguing, has to draw you in. Yeah, you started highlighting a little bit about where he went, so maybe I'll dive into that a little bit. When you were looking through that first section, and you're right, there's a combination of three things in that stop section. He really asks the reader to focus on, and one is just a really basic clarity over what you really want. When you and I sit down to do any planning process, I'm a big begin with the end in mind. So he starts with that ideology of what is it that you really want? And he takes you through a process to do that so that you can, in fact, determine your course. And that's the evaluation part of that section. And then ultimately, the rejuvenate piece is his reminder that you have to be physically and mentally ready to handle all of the logistical execution that you're going to do. So if your body and your mind aren't prepared for that,
Hmm.
it doesn't matter that you came up with a real clear vision of what you want or a real clear commitment to determine your course, the combination of those three matter. Tell me about what hit you when you were forced to introduce his ideology with stop. That's a strange place to start a book.
Yeah, there was some statistics that I was reading about. Like, for instance, once you get over 50 hours a week of work, your productivity actually drops. And so, even though you're working more, you're actually working less. Like, what you're getting done is less. And I think that's a great reminder, especially in this industry. They hit me that I thought, "Oh, I need to bring that up to my team again of you can work more than 50, but your productivity is actually going to drop if you do that." The other thing I thought that I really liked was that we have to protect our energy and focus on where we get the best energy, and it has nothing to do with time. And that is such a good reminder, I think, for everybody of to think of there are some things all the time that drain us if we do them. And what can I do to protect my energy? Because we always talk about, oh, I need to be efficient. I need to do this and I need to do that. But where can you think about that and just replace the word time with energy?
Okay, unpack that a little bit for our audience because I think that's powerful, and I definitely think that you're right. It's part of the ingredient that maybe even one of those secret sauces for Michael's, model that you need because without that level of rejuvenation, it's very difficult. And you're right, we do have lots of productivity buzzwords, and so it's
Mm-hmm.
easy to think, let's be more efficient, let's be more effective. Words that mean something, by the way, but without some ability to do something different it's probably very fleeting. You feel like I'm trying very hard to be efficient. I'm trying very hard to be effective. What does it actually mean to create the energy and to protect it in a way to where it actually is working for you rather than against you? Give the audience an example of what that feels like for you.
Yeah, so I think it's a few things to create energy he talks about outside of work, like working out and sleeping and time with people that you enjoy being around, getting out in nature. He talks through a lot of that stuff. So some of it's doing that because those create such like amazing energy during your day. And then it's also saying, okay, there are certain tasks that I do that I am, and we've this is a totally different book, but like where you're just they create energy and they excite you and it's the part of your job you love. But so many times we get away from that if either if we move up in a position or you start to, it's I think about there's a show where the CEO comes back into working with the customer and going into branches and things like that. And it's like undercover. And I
Yeah,
think how
undercover
much,
boss.
yes, there we go. And how much that rejuvenates them. There's obviously lots of other parts of that show that are great that we could talk about, but some of it is just getting that energy back of, oh yeah, this is why I'm doing what I'm doing. So I thought that was pretty interesting of, hey, there's a lot of things we do in our day that maybe we don't need to do that we could then in that second phase cut, eliminate, delegate all of those things out of what we do every day.
Yeah, his model for this, was that productivity compass, the freedom compass, I believe he calls it. And so one of the quotes that really inspired me in the spirit of what you're describing is true productivity isn't well, what it is, it's about doing more of what's in your desire zone and less of absolutely everything else. And that really is hard for some entrepreneur people to hear because they have believed for a long time that in order for things to get done they've got to do them themselves or they have to understand every aspect of their business. And while there's some truth to those statements, if we just like you talked about, if we make that the habit that we embrace all the time, then the only thing we can do is work more hours. And if at some point we hit the peak of our productivity zone, then effectively we're losing productivity as we
Mhm.
continue in that space. So I think it's really important, like in a compass, to figure out where our true north is, where that desire zone is the best combination of things I'm really passionate about doing as a leader and the things I'm really proficient with because I have that knowledge. I have those skills. It's affirmed by others that that's where we need you the most. That's where the business needs you the most. And if I can get clear on those and begin to let go of some of those other things, whether those are things I choose to delegate, or those are things I choose to eliminate, or maybe I outsource. There's lots of, hire to fill those roles. I spend more time in that high true north development zone where I'm
Hmm.
my best version of myself as a leader. So that's a great reminder, because most of us understand that. We get stuck in that, the opposite of the true north is the drudgery zone. And I probably don't need to describe what that feels like to most of our listeners. They know it all too well. Okay, great. So he moves into, from that a section which he calls the cut zone, where it's really learning how to flex your no muscle. There's a lot in there I loved. Anything that grabbed your attention?
I think all of us talk about no and how to say no and what to say no to, and something that maybe I don't know that this is from the book, but a trick that I use a lot to say no that I figured could help other people is I need to honor the commitments that I've already made. And I think that's a great way to say that. And that's kind of what he says in the book too, of, hey, figure out what you can say yes to and what you need to say no to.
Yeah, the way he says it is different, but you're 100% right. You're nailing the spirit of it. And his quote was, even if we hate saying no, we understand that every yes inherently contains a no. And that,
Yeah.
if you spend some time thinking about that, it's true. Like, I said yes to be on this podcast with you today. So by definition, I'm not on another client call. I'm
Right.
not managing something else with my family. I'm not
Hmm.
out playing pickleball or hiking or biking or anything else I might enjoy doing in the spring season. I'm here with you. So by saying yes to you, I inherently said no to a lot of other things.
Hmm.
And it's important for leaders to recognize that, because I think we, especially if we struggle with saying no, it can be daunting when we find ourselves saying yes to too many things and realizing that now the no is actually landing on things like
Hmm.
our sleep, or our exercise, or our
Yeah.
diet, or our personal relationships. I probably don't need to go much further past that. Oh, maybe I'll go one more. How about every time you've said yes to something in your business because it'll make money, do you really think through the cost on your personal finances when you think, oh gosh, now I've got to outsource that and hire that? You and I just talked
Hmm.
about that, talking about spring cleaning in our prep time. I'm gonna have to pay someone to get my yard up to speed so I can maintain it. That's a yes no dilemma. And I think it's so powerful for us to slow down, like he had suggested early on, and then think through these things so we know
Hmm.
what we're saying yes to. Powerful stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. The other thing, it's kind of going back, but how much we don't nowadays spend time in just that thinking time and that no devices time and that just to ruminate on something, which probably helps those decisions become so much more clear. It's like, why was I even considering this as an option? Once I really take a minute and think about it, the answer totally changes. So I think always sleeping on a decision can be such a good idea because it gives you a little bit of that peace time
Yeah.
and for your brain to work on something. So I think that that kind of goes hand in hand with some of that cut part of the book.
Yeah, the other part of that section that, of course, I'm passionate about, you've heard me talk about it 420,000 times, are the 5 levels of delegation. And this one was so
Yeah.
practical for me personally that I began talking about with clients, and I found quickly that it resonated. I mean, literally last week, I had a client who said, can you walk me through those 5 levels again? And so, to give Michael Hyatt proper credit, that's the first place I read about this concept. And then I just embraced it. And it's now become part of my practice as a leader. And so I want to share it with our audience, because many times we think delegation is really one dimensional. I need to get something off of my plate and get it onto somebody else's plate. Plain and simple. That's delegation. And while on a macro level, that could be true, I think what Hyatt did a great job of is
Hmm.
zooming in on that to say, but aren't there different versions of delegation based on situation, or based on the people involved, or based on the results you need? And so he unpacks these 5 levels. I'll do it quickly with you, Catherine, but not because you haven't heard these, but I want to make sure our audience grabs them. He reminds us that level 1 delegation is when you know exactly what you want, you know exactly how to do it, and you just need to tell someone, do it this way. That's a basic level one delegation. Do it this way. Don't ask any questions. Don't deviate from the plan. This is the result I need. Here's how to do it. Level two is similar to it, but the piece that changes is instead of it being, this is what I need as far as an end result, and this is how to do it, I might say, but do you have any questions that you might want to clarify? And while that may seem slight, it's really important if you think about when you're leading someone. Sometimes you don't want them asking questions. You just want them to do it exactly like you want. And other times you want them to ask questions partly because you want to make sure they understand it, and also because you may find that their questions expand the opportunity more than what you saw. Third level of delegation now is, this is the result I need. This is typically how I would do it, but how would you do it if this was your idea and you needed this result? Now I'm asking for your creativity. It's not just your question, it's like, come up with an idea, a solution. How would you solve this problem? The fourth level of delegation is, now we're going to cut to the chase. This is the result I need. You figure out how to do it and then just report back to me. Let me know how the end result turned out, because I'd like to, tie it down, like to know how it went. And that, of course, leads to level five. This is the end result I need. Please figure it out. And we don't even need to talk about it. I just trust that you'll get it done and we don't talk about it again. Now, I'm highlighting those at a very high level, but if you think about the nuances between each of those, most leaders start to see, oh my gosh, I have a lot more opportunity in those five levels to work through delegation, meaning I might have someone that I want to work through a specific delegation at each of those levels so I can watch them grow as I hand them more and more authority. Other times they realize, oh gosh, I can use level four for this type of task, but level two for that type of task. And they start to recognize it may
Hmm.
depend on the task at hand. And then third is they may just recognize, oh, based on the skill level of the person I'm delegating to, that'll determine the level, because I want to trust them up to the peak of their competency, but not beyond it to where now I'm frustrated because I maybe trusted them with something that they weren't prepared for. And that's not their fault. That's my fault. I gave them a task that I didn't train them for or they weren't prepared for. So I need to stop at the level of delegation that's appropriate. I know I just threw a lot down there, Catherine, but when you hear those, you see it every day in your team. Um, Talk to the audience about how the five levels of delegation have really helped you with your team.
Yeah. So first, I want to point to episode 11. So that tells you how much Michael loves the five levels of delegation because we went through it in one of our very early
About
podcasts.
100 episodes ago,
I
yes.
know. So episode 11 goes through those five levels. If you do want to hear more about it, I just looked it up. So it's definitely good because you can watch people go in and out. And sometimes it's good for me to go back and go, oh, I meant for this to be more like a level four, but instead I kind of did it like a level one. And maybe I need to reassess how I did this and explain the levels and explain, like, oh, yeah, really, I want this to be where it's just taken care of. You do it however you want. And there are things that you need done in a very specific way. Like for me, I get a little bit picky about how we communicate with the clients, but also there's things like I don't really care how someone, let's say orders a flood cert. I don't even know how to do it. I just want it to be done. I don't even care who does these seven parts of the loan as long as it gets done. So there's definitely different parts that apply in our business so much. And I think that it's good to just keep those in mind as we're communicating with those on our team.
That's really good. And of course, I just thought of 100 examples just as you gave those. So I'll resist the temptation to turn left and make this a part two of the five levels of delegation. But I hope the audience, if they do go back and listen, can see where this fits into a larger framework. And I think what was cool about Hyatt's framework and Free to Focus is he then moves forward once you've been able to identify those five levels. You're now starting to take action. That's part of what those levels of delegation are about. So he looks
Mhm.
then at the three levels of act, the three levels of taking action on things. Now that you've stopped and you've cut, you're going to consolidate, you're going to designate, you're ultimately going to activate, which means you're going to plan out things like your ideal week, something you and I did very early on in our coaching. And we revisit it from time to time as a topic because as the seasons of our role change as a leader, some of the priorities change. Our focus plan might change, the business plan that you're
Yeah.
operating from. And therefore, where things fit in your calendar probably need to be reevaluated as well. So, your ideal week is a tool in which you're essentially driving your calendar toward the version of your week you really want, rather than letting other people dictate what goes into your calendar. I mean, imagine if every client that ever called you said, I'd like to meet, or I'd like to talk, or I'd like to set up a Zoom, and you just let them always pick the time and you just said yes to everybody. I mean, your calendar would be crazy. It would be all over the
Yeah.
place. But if you're planning an ideal week, you're probably going to offer them some spots that you've already designated are good spots for you to have those one on one meetings with a client. And guess what happens probably 9 times out of 10? The client's totally happy to pick one of those that's available.
Hmm.
It's rare and it will happen that someone says, you always seem to be available at these times. Those don't work for me. Well, you're probably, for that one client, going to decide if you want to make an accommodation. And if you do, it'll work out. But talk to me about the value of an ideal week, because I hope our audience understands, sometimes they hear time blocking and that creates a negative response like, oh man, now I'm boxed in all day. I actually think it fits right within the free to focus title.
Hmm.
It's freedom when I plan an ideal week. Talk to me about it, Catherine.
Yeah, I actually had a talk with someone on my team about this today because when you first start in a position, it's hard because you've got all these things and you're just kind of getting through them. But
Hmm.
what I was talking to her about is the more you do stuff, the more you realize things fit into categories or groups. And you can say, hey, on Tuesdays and Thursdays is a great day for me to do agent updates, and you start to kind of group those things together. And then it gives you some like focus for your day. And you can say, hey, I can I can push that to tomorrow because that's the day that I do this. And it doesn't have to be perfect. It can be buckets. So you could say, like for me, afternoon is client appointments. It might be that some days I have two and some days I have four, but in the afternoons is when I do those. Mornings is roughly, the follow up stuff, meetings, things like that typically fall in the morning. And it makes it so much easier for me because I know we're going to have the whole morning to prep for client calls in the afternoon. And it's certain things start to say, oh, wow, that's a really good time spot for that. I'm really glad I did that. But part of that comes from the energy that you have that we talked about earlier of, hey, I meet with clients different in the morning than I do in the afternoon. And where does certain things need my energy? So I need to place them in my day based on that energy that I've created with all the other stuff that I've done.
Really great. Really great. Yeah, I think the power of this is a multiplier for sure, but you've got to convince people to give it a try, and you got to give them space to work their way into it. In fact, with some clients, I have to approach this and tell them we're not going to micromanage anything. Let's start with macro managing. So when you talk about things have a theme to them, or they can be batched together because they're similar in their task, that helps them kind of get their feet in the water. And before you know it, we're
Hmm.
up to our knees. And before you know it, we're kind of waist deep. You can work your way into the deeper part of the pool until we get to another one of the old Michael Regan classic models, which again, this one I did not lift from Free to Focus. I think Michael probably brought it in just like I feel it's a classic tool, but he uses the Eisenhower priority matrix, which is that classic 4 box model that you and I've done many times. And he'll
Hmm.
draw in the middle of a page or in the middle of a whiteboard an equator line right in the middle, and he'll say, "Look, everything above this line is important. Everything below this line, it's just not as important." It doesn't mean that it doesn't matter to someone, but for you as a leader, you can see the difference between the things that you recognize are truly important from the things that
Hmm.
are just not as important. But then he draws a vertical line right down the middle. So now we've got a nice big plus sign on the board. And he says, but let's separate those things on the important side into the urgent and the not as urgent. Therefore, the not important become
Hmm.
also urgent and not as urgent. And when you separate them that way, it allows you to sort. I tell people this matrix won't solve anything, but it'll help you sort everything. And if you can sort it, often now you know where to focus, because of that first box, that upper left is always going to be the thing that was most important and most urgent. And we're going to work through those first. So in that time block, or in that plan we make for the day, we want to spend the limited amount of energy and time we have on the most urgent and important things before we move to the important things that aren't as urgent. Those might get scheduled. We might tell someone, Catherine, I'm going to get back to you on that one before the end of the day versus drop everything right now at 10 in the morning and do
Mhm.
it. Because I realize it's important. It's just not urgent. As long as I get it to you by the end of the day, we're all fine. So I have to have that executive function to separate those. Sometimes that third box where someone has created urgency over something that I know is not only not urgent, it's not even that important. The urgency is artificial.
Mhm.
I have to recognize that in those might be some good things to practice those 5 levels of delegation on. You know what, Catherine? Right now, I'm in the middle of this with a client, but I see this is important to you. Would you mind if I ask Katie, good old Katie out there? Hopefully, she doesn't feel like Catherine's like, oh, great. Now Michael's going to leverage Katie for her great skills, but someone else is going to be able to handle that on the team. And so we can
Mhm.
practice delegation. Of course, if it's not that urgent, not that important, my encouragement, same with Michael Hyatt, would be why are we prioritizing that at all? Like that sounds like the kind of mundane stuff that's bogging down your day,
Mhm.
and maybe it needs to just go away, or at least remove it from the purview. So that matrix, I'm a fan of. We've done a prior episode on that one as well. But it's a great tie down of how to execute once you've designed that ideal week. All right, I know we could cover a lot of details in the books as we look through this as a whole. Any other takeaways you hope the audience would grab from Free to Focus, Catherine?
I think right now there's so much noise, and there's lots in this book that's really, really great. But I think part of it is we tend to say, I'll just work more hours, or I need a break, so I'm going to pick up my phone. And instead, kind of think through that and say, hey, instead of this, what if I walk outside? What if I just sit for 5 minutes without anything around me? So I think right now that's one of the biggest pieces is that stop part of, hey, more is not better, more is
Hmm.
more. And what can I do to be more efficient and get some of that stuff off of my plate so that I can be more effective? And I think that's kind of where some of the things that are hitting me as I continue to look at this book.
Well, I hope our audience can at least see that there are a lot of practical things. We're not even walking you through all of the little steps he takes. I mean, if you are a person who values the instructions, like, okay, you're talking about these topics, but how do I actually do this? Michael does, Michael Hyatt does a wonderful job of punching these down step by step. And I'll leave you with one that matters to me a lot, but he talks about it in the book, and it's a great reminder if we're really going to execute on any of these ideas. Is at some point you're also going to have to identify and remove distractions, and we all have those. We all have them in our lives. Many of us have them sitting in our purse or our hip pocket at all times. Our viewing audience just saw me hold up an iPhone. The tools that are available in this technology in our pocket are incredible, but if we allow them to distract us constantly, our productivity will suffer for it. So one of the things he talks about in this whole purging process is eliminating all of the notifications and then slowly building back the ones that fit in that important urgent category, because so often we download an app or we sign up for a service and we just accept the default punch down in order to, I just need to get the app, or I just need to get whatever the result comes from the app. And we're not really thinking through the cost of all of those distractions that we've given permission to. So I think a great takeaway from this episode, if you're excited to read a book like Free to Focus, would be maybe before you download the book, try to practice one of his favorite implementations and go look at all of your notifications on your device and ask yourself a simple question, just like that model. How many of these things are really important and how many are not that important? And of the ones that are important, how many are really urgent? Do I really need to be notified for that? Turns out on my iPhone, guess what I need to be notified of? Telephone calls. I'll take that notification. Emails, I turned them off. It's
Oh, yeah.
been so freeing for me to be able to check my email when I'm ready to read email, not just because you decided it was a good time to hit send. That doesn't automatically mean it's a great time for me to read it. and it's on and on after that. So I hope you've had some fun deleting some notifications on your end, Catherine.
Oh gosh, yeah. I have them almost all turned off.
Catherine, we'll pull out some more implementations from this one because as we reread this again, like my audience heard earlier on, we introduced this book to our friends back in 2019, but it's a great one to revisit now because one thing I realized as I went back and pulled it off the shelf to revisit it is 2019 I was fired up about my 2020 plans until this little worldwide global pandemic happened.
Hmm.
And it really made most of us rethink everything. And I'm not going to spend time looking in the rearview mirror. It was appropriate for us to rethink everything, but I might have lost some of my freedom to focus because of it. And if that's you, if that's me, we owe it to ourselves to take responsibility for that. And maybe reading or listening to an audiobook called Free to Focus will help you revisit some of those priorities in your life and give you an opportunity to take some ownership back over the areas of productivity that really do matter to you and maybe let go of some of those things that have stacked up on your day and are eroding the quality of your return of time and investment of money. So I pray that you will today take seriously the freedom to focus. And Catherine, I had a lot of fun going back and revisiting this. So thanks for spending time with me on it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great book with a ton of good takeaways. And you could probably rate books about what he covers, like picking a topic. And holy cow, there's so much information in this book.
Fair enough. All right. I'll let you bring us home. And thanks again for listening on today's episode.
Thanks so much for joining us on Building Bigger Lives. You can find us on all of the places you listen to your podcasts. Please like, please share. Thanks again.